Okay, let's unpack this. You know that feeling, right? Setting up a new password online.
Oh, yeah.
8 characters, uppercase, lowercase, some weird symbol, a prime number. Feels like you need a code breaker.
Definitely. Very specific rules.
And it got me thinking, if something like a password needs all that defining, what about really big ideas like domestication? Dogs, cats, wheat, corn.
Right, how we got our food, our companions.
You'd think that would have a really clear set definition, wouldn't you?
You would think so. It seems straightforward. Wild animal becomes tame, wild plant becomes crop. But as we've seen from the research we looked at.
Yeah, the physit.org piece in those academic papers.
Exactly. They show it's actually been surprisingly difficult to nail down one definition everyone agrees on.
Which is exactly what we're diving into today. And this isn't just, arguing about words. This is about understanding a huge force that's literally reshaped our planet.
A massive force.
We've got the Royal Society stuff reminding us definitions matter, the phys.org article summarizing this new thinking, and then these 2 really deep papers, Redefining Domestication and Seeking Consensus.
Yeah, they really get into the weeds.
So our mission for you listening is to cut through that complexity. We want to get you to a clearer, more scientific understanding of what domestication actually means today, moving beyond that simple picture of humans just taking control.
Because the research really challenges that long-held view, doesn't it? That domestication is purely something we did intentionally.
Total.
But look at the scale of it. The phys.org article mentions agriculture and rangelands cover about 1/3 of the Earth's land. 1/3.
Wow.
And get this, humans, our pets, our livestock, we make up over 90% of all the mammal biomass on the planet.
90%. That's staggering. That impact is undeniable.
It really is, but thinking it's all down to deliberate human planning, that misses a lot of the picture.
Yeah, the papers talk about this false dichotomy, says Darwin, right? Separating artificial selection by humans from natural selection.
Exactly. Like domestication is this special category, completely separate from normal evolution, kind of put in its own box labeled human-made.
But it's not really like that, is it? It's much more mixed up with natural processes.
It really seems to be. And, when you look closely at the animals and plants we call domesticated, how much direct day-to-day control do we actually have?
That's a great question. That PNAS paper had some figures, something like 76 to 83% of dogs globally. They live mostly without direct human supervision.
Right. Free-roaming dogs, village dogs.
And it's not just animals. Think about plants. Blackberries escape cultivation, become weeds, or those feral pigs causing, $800 million in damage in the U.S. every year.
Yeah, $800 million. That's hardly total control, is it?
Not quite the puppet master image we sometimes have.
It really isn't. And the papers also make a really good point about time. We tend to project our current relationships back onto the past, assuming it was always like this.
Right, like with chickens. The research suggests their ancestors, the red junglefowl, weren't first drawn to us for food.
No, it seems they were attracted to early dry rice farming, like the environment itself.
And it was only, 500 years later that they became a major food source for us?
Something like that, yeah. So the initial link wasn't about us wanting eggs or meat. It was about them finding a new niche we'd created.
An anthropogenic niche. That's the term they use, right? The human-shaped world.
Exactly. And then the relationship evolved from there. And there's that other great example in the PNAS paper about large grain size in plants.
Oh, yeah. The thing we always think is proof of humans selecting for bigger yields.
Right. But the archaeology suggests it might have initially popped up because of competition between seedlings in those early fields. Not necessarily because farmers were consciously picking the biggest seeds.
So a key domestication trait might have just happened as a result of the environment changing.
It's certainly possible. It shows how complex these evolutionary pressures can be.
Okay, so if human control and intentionality aren't the whole story, what about the definitions themselves? What's wrong with the old ways of defining domestication?
Well, the papers point out a few key problems. Older definitions usually center on human control, human intention, and this idea that humans are exceptional managing food, safety, breeding.
But as we just said, that control part is often fuzzier than we think.
Exactly. And then there's the problem of comparing modern domesticates to their wild ancestors.
Because those ancestors are often, we don't know exactly what they were like. They might be extinct.
Right. Or even if the wild relatives still exist today, they've been evolving too. They aren't a perfect baseline from thousands of years ago.
Like the pigs example. Modern European pigs have genes from European wild boar mixed in, not just their Middle Eastern ancestors. And then later, genes from East Asian pigs got added. It's a real genetic mix.
It makes a simple A to B comparison really difficult, almost impossible sometimes.
And just finding ancient remains. That doesn't automatically mean domestication either, does it?
No, that's a crucial point. The PNAS paper mentions finding similar yeast strains in ancient Egyptian beer pots,
Right.
but only one strain actually showed genetic adaptations for making beer. The others were maybe just there,
Yeah.
used, but not necessarily adapted to that process in an evolutionary way.
So it highlights that domestication is a process. It happens over generations. It's not just one moment in time.
Exactly. It's evolution playing out.
Okay, and what about the domestication syndrome? That list of traits we often see changes in size, color, behavior.
Yeah, that idea is facing some challenges too. The problem is a bit circular.
How so?
Well, to identify the syndrome, you first need to decide which populations are domesticated to see what traits they share, right?
Okay.
But then you can't really use those same traits to define domestication because you use the definition to find the traits in the first place.
Ah, I see. It's like chasing your tail a bit.
Kind of, yeah. It's a logical loop. And maybe that's why we've seen this explosion of terminology.
Oh, the paper mentioned the 13 new terms leading to 38 definitions.
Something like that, yeah. It suggests the core concept wasn't clear or robust enough, so people kept trying to tweak it or add bits to make it fit specific cases.
Okay, so loads of problems with the old views. Let's get to the new proposal. What's this evolutionary definition all about?
The core idea, really, is shifting the focus. Instead of seeing it as something humans do, it's about the evolution of another population in response to a human-shaped environment, that anthropogenic niche again.
So it's about how they adapt to us and the world we make.
Precisely. And a key part is that a truly domestic population often can't survive long-term outside that human-influenced environment.
Okay, that makes sense. It avoids guessing about ancient intentions or trying to find vanished ancestors. It's about the relationship now.
Exactly. And the PNAS paper lays out this really useful spectrum. It's not just wild or domesticated.
Right, there are levels of interaction. Species that avoid us, species that tolerate us.
Species that exploit us, like pigeons or rats.
And then at the far end, the ones that truly depend on us. The obligates and anthropes or domestic populations.
Yeah, it's a much more nuanced way to think about it. Helps explain why some things thrive with us and others don't.
It feels much more ecological. Now, the Seeking Consensus paper digs into some important details about this evolutionary view, like heritability.
Right. Crucial point. For evolution to happen, traits have to be passed down, heritable.
So taming one wolf is just changing its behavior. But if wolves that are less fearful of humans start having pucks that are also less fearful,
And that trait spreads through the population over generations, then you're talking about domestication in this evolutionary sense. The trait has become heritable.
got it. And plasticity comes into it too, and organisms' flexibility.
Yeah, the idea that human environments can be quite changeable, so they might favor organisms that are more flexible or adaptable in their development. And fundamentally, domestication happens to populations, not just individuals.
Right. One weird seed isn't domestication, it's when that trait becomes common across the whole group. Like the tough versus brittle seed heads in grains, different forms existing in the population.
Exactly. The paper then questions definitions that require a benefit to humans.
Which seems a bit self-centered, doesn't it?
It's very anthropocentric, yeah. It would exclude things like early cats or dogs, maybe just hanging around for scraps, or mice and rats in our walls. Are they domesticated? They benefit from us, but maybe we don't benefit from them directly.
Good point. What about those feral animals? Or animals evolving smaller horns because of hunting? We caused the change, but is it a benefit to us? Probably not.
Exactly. It complicates that human benefit requirement. They also question needing a benefit to the other organism, though they talk about mutualism.
The who domesticated whom
Yeah.
idea. Plants using us to spread their seeds.
Right. But while mutualisms exist, the paper argues that proving coevolution reciprocal genetic changes in both partners is hard and might not apply to everything. Did humans genetically co-evolve with, say, the cacao tree? Or cats? Maybe not directly.
Interesting distinction. And they also push back against limiting what counts as a domestication trait, like saying early changes are domestication, but later breeding is just improvement.
Yeah, they argue that's drawing an arbitrary line. If a weed evolves resistance to herbicide because of our farming practices.
That's still evolution happening in response to a human-shaped environment. It's part of the same broad process.
Exactly, like saying human evolution stopped after we started walking upright. It's an ongoing process.
And intentionality, the idea that we meant to do it.
That's being questioned too. Darwin himself thought early domestication was largely unconscious. People weren't necessarily trying to create rye, it just thrived as a weed in wheat fields and got harvested along with it. Or dogs starting as scavengers around camps.
Makes sense. So what about these postmodern definitions the paper mentions, moving away from evolution?
Yeah, those seem to focus more on human agency perspectives and sometimes social or political ideas like landscape domestication or even anti-domestication.
So less about the biology and more about human interpretation or control, maybe viewed through a lens of colonialism or empowerment.
Kind of. The paper suggests that while those perspectives are important, they can sometimes circle back to emphasizing human impact, just with different value judgments. The authors argue for a definition grounded in the observable evolutionary biology, separate from those frameworks.
Okay. And they loop back to the domestication syndrome one last time.
Yeah, just clarifying that while it's maybe not a perfect analogy to medical syndromes, it's often used ecologically to talk about parallel evolution, like island syndrome, where island species evolve similar traits. But again, you hit that circularity problem if you try to use it as the definition.
Right. So pulling all this together,
Mm.
how do they propose we define it scientifically?
They suggest thinking of domesticated as an ecological category, a polyphyletic guild.
Like herbivore or pollinator,
Yeah,
a role or relationship.
exactly. Defined by the evolutionary relationship with humans and anthropogenic environments, not just by genetics. It's about how they've adapted to us.
That feels much clearer. Pollinators can be bees or birds or bats. Domesticates can be dogs or wheat or yeast linked by that evolved response to humans.
Precisely. And they point out that domesticates are rarely fully genetically isolated from wild relatives, so an ecological focus on observable traits, the phenotype, makes more sense than strict genetic definitions. They even say de-domestication doesn't really fit evolution. Evolution doesn't just run backwards.
So what are the actual proposed definitions?
They offer a couple of options. A domesticated clade is any lineage of organism that is phenotypically distinct from other lineages because of evolutionary differences resulting from interactions with humans.
Okay, distinct because of interactions with us.
And for the process, a change in heritable phenotypic traits in a population over time resulting from interactions with humans. Simple, focused on heritable change driven by us. They also suggest just talking about evolved traits of domestication.
So this umbrella covers
Mhm.
way more than just farms and pets.
Yeah, way more. Mutualists, commensals like city foxes, parasites adapting to us, animals evolving traits due to hunting pressure, plants evolving herbicide resistance, even birds changing their migration or beak shape because of bird feeders.
Wow, if it's evolving because of human activity, it fits under this broad definition.
That's the idea. And it's not tied to one specific genetic mechanism. Could be changes in development, mobile DNA, epigenetics, and it can happen fast or slow.
Some might say that's too broad, though. Does it lose meaning?
They address that. They argue the breadth is actually useful analytically. It forces us to recognize the massive scale of human influence, this ongoing domestication of Earth, which is a huge conservation issue.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the big shift is seeing domestication not just as human control, but as an evolutionary response by other species to us and the world we've built.
Exactly. And that response is happening everywhere, involving all sorts of organisms, many we wouldn't normally think of as domesticated.
The real sort of aha moment is realizing just how deeply human activity is tweaking the evolutionary paths of so many species, often without us even intending to. It's like those complex password rules. The rules of human influence are pervasive, even if we don't always see them.
Yeah, it's a fundamental force now. And understanding that evolutionary angle is really vital for tackling challenges like biodiversity loss and conservation today. How do we manage ecosystems when almost everything is adapting to us in some way?
Which leads to that final thought for you listening. We're not just looking back at ancient history here. This broad view suggests domestication is an ongoing planet-wide process right now. It makes you think, doesn't it? What's our role in this constant reshaping, and what does it mean for the future of life on this increasingly domesticated Earth?